Farm Bureau. Tyler Horka joins us right now. That is a name that I'm sure you recognize. He was in the state of Mississippi covering Mississippi State at the Clarion Ledger for the last couple of years, now with Blue and Gold Illustrated in South Bend, and is covering the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Tyler, thanks for a few minutes of your time this afternoon. I'm curious, first of all, when you move into a role covering a program that has the historical significance of a Notre Dame, what's the immersion process like when you kind of walk in the door and you say, okay, not only do I have to cover this team, but I've got to have like this body of knowledge that goes along with it as well?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Richard, the first thing that I noticed was just the size of the beat and how many people there are covering Notre Dame. And I always thought there were a lot of people covering Mississippi State, and I was very impressed. I mean, obviously we all know that Starkville's not the biggest college town out there, but there's a lot of people that get to Mississippi State and get to Starkville to cover those games and even practices and even midweek availabilities. But I showed up here for the first day of fall camp, and there must have been, 5 TV stations as opposed to a couple, and there were probably close to 20 beat writers. It seems like every outlet has at least a couple guys, and it's just kind of crazy to see that. And that's when it hits you, and that's when I realized, I was like, man, I'm covering Notre Dame. This is a place that has, I think it's 11 national championships. I should probably get that down by September 5th. It's just, I took a walk around campus before fall camp started with my sister who helped me move in up here. And even she knows, the historical significance of a place like this. And I think she can count on one hand how many college football games she's been to. She might not even need a couple fingers, to be honest with you. So she knows this, the gold helmets. That's what she said. She said she was like, you're covering that team with the gold helmets. And I'm like, yeah, that's Notre Dame. So it is pretty crazy to be up here. And it's definitely, I researched all summer. I watched every single game from the 2020 season. I bought a couple books on the history of Notre Dame. It seems like there's so much that you have to know when you're covering a team in a program like this.
So what was that first walk around campus like? I mean, I've always heard people say that when you step on the Notre Dame campus, it feels a little bit different. My guess is it feels different in, late June, early July than it does if you're doing it, in October with the chill in the air and, they're waking up the echoes and whatnot. What was it like, though, that first time, that kind of first walk around, soaking it in?
Yeah, I tell you what, I walked out the door this morning, and I thought I was back in Mississippi. It's about 90 degrees with a little bit of humidity in the air. So I'm wanting that, those 4-foot snow days and whatnot, but right now I wouldn't really mind one. But it kind of felt like the movie Rudy, and I know everyone's all seen it, and that might be the most cliche thing I've ever said, and I've said a lot of cliche things, but just walking around Notre Dame Stadium and seeing Touchdown Jesus, and then walking down to the grotto, and I think it was like a Monday afternoon, and there were a bunch of candles lit there, and there were some people praying, and there is just a different feel when you walk onto a campus like this. And I mean, this is our job, right? We go to a whole bunch of college campuses. I've been on a few college campuses with Brian Haydad, and this one just feels a little different than any of the ones that we've ever been to. And I'm, a couple weeks into fall camp, and I'm sitting in a parking lot right now after just taking in the first 30 minutes of a Notre Dame practice, and it still feels a little surreal, and it's just different. That's probably the word to describe it. It's just different here.
Tyler Horka from Blue and Gold Illustrated covers Notre Dame now on your radio on the Farm Bureau phone line. When you look at Notre Dame traditionally and this year as well, their schedule is so unique, and it's become more unique in recent years because it's got the 5 ACC games that rotate, but then they don't shy away. They still play Navy every year, and they still play Stanford every year, and they still play Southern Cal every year, and those dates kind of change. Is it fair to say that, well, no, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. When you look at this year's schedule for Notre Dame, what do you make of it? Is it ridiculous? Is it not too bad? Is it somewhere in the middle?
I would say it's somewhere in the middle, and maybe even leaning on the not too bad side, because you look at it, and I think there's 4 ranked teams. Those polls just came out in the last couple of weeks. There's 4 ranked teams on the Notre Dame schedule, and Notre Dame gets 3 of them at home. And that includes USC, that includes Cincinnati. Wisconsin is a neutral site game on the road in Chicago, which is only 2 hours at the most from here. And then North Carolina has to come in to Notre Dame Stadium as well. And I know North Carolina's pretty highly ranked because they've got Sam Howell, and, Mac Brown is kind of turning that program around if he hasn't already. But they lost a lot of guys, and they've got to come to South Bend, and USC has to come to South Bend. Cincinnati's got to drive up the interstate and come to South Bend. So I don't think the schedule was too hard. Obviously, Notre Dame is a little more worried about its own personnel and replacing Ian Book and some of those guys from last year's defense that also went to the NFL. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah won the Butkus Award, and they've got to replace him. So the schedule's not too bad, but there are some worries just personnel-wise, within the program itself.
Obviously, Ian Book is now in New Orleans. Talk to us about the quarterback position this year. What is that going to look like for Brian Kelly's team?
Yeah, they've got Jack Coan, who transferred in from Wisconsin. The Big Ten had a weird year last year and started almost in November, so they only played 6 games or whatever it was. And Jack Coan didn't play any of those games because he underwent a foot surgery in early October, sat out the season, decided to spend the rest of his college eligibility at Notre Dame, and he won the starting job really early in fall camp. It was one of those classic quarterback competitions coming in where you got a sophomore in Drew Pine who's been here for over a year, obviously, and a lot of the guys are close to him. They think that he can start and win games right away for Notre Dame. But when you bring in a fifth-year guy from a program like Wisconsin who's played at the Power 5 level and won 10 games in 2019 as a starter, obviously, it was always trending toward Jack Coan starting at quarterback for Brian Kelly, and that's the way it played out pretty early in fall camp too.
This may be a dumb question. Since everybody got a free year last year, does Jack Coan get 2 free years? I mean, can he double up on medical redshirt and the free COVID year, or does he only have the 1 year left?
I'm going to be completely honest with you, Richard, and I did the research on that. I talked to people, and I said, does he have 2 years? Some people told me yes, but then I just overheard the other day, and some people said, no, this is Jack Coan's only year. The way I interpret the rules, like you said, with that medical redshirt that he had, and then the free COVID year as well, I would think you could double up. But that being said, like I said, Notre Dame is starting to recruit almost at that Alabama, Clemson, Georgia level to where they're bringing in quarterbacks that they think could really start right away. They have one right now in Tyler Buckner, who's pushing for the number 2 job, a true freshman. I think this is Jack Coan's only year at Notre Dame. But the way I look at the rule, I'm saying, well, could he go play somewhere else again? I know he already transferred, or could he stay at Notre Dame for that extra year? It's all a mess. You guys know that. But I would say that this is Jack Coan's only year at Notre Dame.
That's fair. Visiting with Tyler Horka. We've had this debate in the past, and I'm curious, as I'm sure you've looked at it closely. Is Brian Kelly undervalued as a college football coach? There are people that will say, well, they've gotten to the big game, but they can't win the big game. But he's gotten Notre Dame back to a place that it has not been since the late 80s under Lou Holtz, and certainly has been more consistent than anything else since. Do we undervalue the job that Brian Kelly's done?
Yeah, I think people get a little jaded, and that's not very fair to Brian Kelly because, when you're winning 10-plus games a year the way he has been the last few years, and that goes all the way back to the very beginning of his tenure at Notre Dame when I know that season ended early when they played Alabama for the national championship. I think that was 2012 season, somewhere around there. It's just the fact that he's lost all these big games. That's where people say, okay, well, what does it really matter if he's winning 10-plus games and in some of these seasons going 12-0 if he's only going to lose the big one? Look, this is a coach who's 4 wins away from becoming the all-time winningest coach at a place like Notre Dame. That right there speaks for itself. You can't say that lightly in any context. Newt Rockne, that's the guy who currently holds the record. He turned Notre Dame.
I've heard of him.
To what I think a lot of people have heard of Newt Rockne. That's the guy who turned Notre Dame into this program. He just kind of set the standard for what Notre Dame is, and so for Brian Kelly to be on the verge of passing him, and it's going to happen this season. Just depends on when it happens. I think then a lot of people will open their eyes and say, "Wow, nobody's won more games at Notre Dame than this guy," and there's something to be said for that.
A lot of really good information there, Tyler. Appreciate you jumping on, spending a few minutes with us, and hope it's a fun year. Certainly is a cool setting that you're going to be in, covering one of the absolute blue bloods in college football. Really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me on. And tell Haydad that I miss him down there, all right?
I'm very
He
proud
hears
of
you.
you, son.
Thank you. Thanks.
That's Tyler Horka from Blue and Gold